Book 2, The Boo-Boos and Bunty's Baby. You all know how Bunty went to Boo-Boo Land and burnt the porridge, and how all the Boo-Boos came home with her, don't you? Well, it was one thing coming home, and quite another finding beds enough for them all to sleep in when they arrived. Bunty's mother hardly knew how to manage. "Don't you bother, Bunty's mother," cried the Boos eagerly. They were so anxious to stop. "We will find a place." And so they did. They simply made themselves so small, Boos can, you remember, that they all fitted into one bed. Bunty had insisted on the king taking Queen Elizabeth's cradle. "It's the only royal couch in the house," she explained, when she came to wish him good night. He looked so comfy, and so as if he belonged. "I do hope Grandpa will let you stay, Boo dear," she said. "We must ask him tomorrow. I'm afraid he is rather grumpy sometimes, you know. He cannot really help it. He is a professor, poor dear, and he may object." The king blew her a loving kiss. "I wonder just what a grandpa is," he thought. "It sounds like an animal." The next morning, the Boos, good little fellows, were up and about quite early. There was no sign of Bunty anywhere. But they found something. They found a baby. Yes, Bunty's baby brother. And directly they saw him, they loved him so much that their little hearts were almost bursting out of their jackets. So big they were with love. One touched his tiny curls. One kissed his warm pink toes. They all crowded round and almost sang aloud for gladness. "Now," said the king thoughtfully, "what does one do with a baby?" "I know! Bath him!" The Boos jumped for joy. They had always longed to bath a real baby. Happy idea! It was rather a job, carrying him from his warm crib to the bath. But after many struggles on the Boos' part, and much gurgling on the baby's, they succeeded. And wasn't Nurse surprised to find all her work done when she returned from saying good morning to the postman? By this time, breakfast was nearly ready, and still no sign of Bunty. "That child will be the death of me," grumbled Nurse. "Always late." "Dear, dear," thought the Boos, "this will never do." So they hurried around, and there, fast asleep in bed, they found her, and the clock pointing nearly to 8, too. Bad child. What a stampede! What a rush! Almost before Bunty could open one eyelid, they had her out of bed, washed, and whisked into her clothes. They were only just in time. You can imagine the crowd at breakfast. But the porridge was scrumptious, and the Boos were enjoying themselves immensely. And if the baby was, well, perhaps not as well-mannered as could be desired, after all, he was only a baby, and no one could expect too much from him. Dear wee diddums. The Boo-Boos had a most busy morning. They helped everybody, and all was going like a song in June, when a rather unfortunate incident occurred. It was like this. One small Boo, in his great haste to assist with the washing, overbalanced himself, and splash plop he went, head over heels into the soapsuds, disappearing completely out of sight. Fortunately, Mary, kind soul, heard his cry of dismay and hastened to his rescue. Shivers and shakes! Poor Boo-Boo! He was very damp, and his wings so bedraggled. Mary wiped his little face with a corner of her apron and pegged him out on her line to dry. And there he was, swaying to and fro in the warm breezes. Meanwhile, the king was having adventures of his own. He had found his way through the dining room, round by the nursery, out into the garden. He wandered happily from flower to flower, when suddenly, oh, how very dreadful! What was that he espied round by the poppy bed? A terrible monster, all covered with brown fur and such fierce bead-like eyes. "It's the grandpa," said the king, all of a tremble. "I must ask him to let me live with Bunty forever." Plucking up all his courage, he approached the monster cautiously. "Hi!" roared the creature. "Who are you poking?" The Boo-Boo bowed most politely. "Are you the grandpa?" he inquired. The creature roared and rocked with laughter. "Good gracious, no! I'm a teddy bear, Bunty's teddy bear. A grandpa indeed!" And the noisy fellow roared louder than ever. The king hurried away. He did not like being laughed at very much. No one does, for that matter. He followed a little path which took him back to the house. A window was standing invitingly open, and the king flew in. He alighted on a table surrounded with books and things, and there, seated at one end of it, sat another monster. "Good morning," said the king meekly. He was feeling anything but at home. Are you a teddy bear? I mean, are you the grandpa? Bunty's grandpa? And if I am, what are you? And what do you want?" almost shrieked the old gentleman, for such he was. The king told his tale. "Boo-boos live with Bunty? Why, there are no such things. Stuff and nonsense. Stuff and nonsense. I won't have the child's head filled with such rubbish," shouted the grandpa angrily. Poor king! He crept away to the potting shed and sat down behind a flower pot. "Rubbish! Stuff and nonsense!" he wailed, his little heart nigh broken. How long he sat there, he did not know. Bunty, missing her little friend, called again and again, but he dared not come out. He could not tell her that he must go away, for he knew so well that tears would come to her blue eyes, and the happy light in her dear little face be clouded over. He could not bear to see it so. He must have fallen asleep, for it was getting dark, and the moon beginning to rise, when a moist, warm nose thrust into his face roused him. It was Mops, the dog. "There you are, then," barked the pup. "A nice time you have given us. 2 of you lost." "2 of us?" questioned the king. "Yes, you first," said Mops the dog, rather aggressively. "And now the baby." The professor took it absent-mindedly under his arm when he went for a walk, thought it was a book or umbrella, and he has dropped it or mislaid it or something. I do think professors ought to be put a stop to, upsetting the house like this. The king rose briskly to his feet, sorrow put aside. Here was work to do. The baby must be found. "Come, Mops," he cried, springing on the pup's back. "Find him, sir, find him." They journeyed here, they journeyed there, and were almost at their wits' end when they saw a frog. "Oh, have you seen a baby about?" they asked. "Watch the robin, watch the robin," croaked the frog, and nothing more could they get out of him. Sure enough, there was a robin hopping about nearby, carrying in its bill a large leaf. "That bird looks as if he was going to cover something up," thought the king. He had heard the sad, sweet story of the babes in the wood and knew what robins were. I must follow him. The bird led them along, till, looking through some long grasses, the king saw Bunty's baby. Fast asleep he was, and not a penny the worse. You are just in time, chirped the bird. I was just going to begin. The king and Mops the dog were overjoyed, and nothing could prevent them from dancing a dance there and then amidst the puffballs. And the baby, waking up, would certainly have joined them, but that he had not yet discovered what his legs were for, and how to get him home. The king blew a long blast on his little whistle, and in less than no time all the boo-boos came hurrying up. I know just the thing, said one small boo. I saw it when I was hanging out to dry. He hurried away, quickly returning with a big clothes basket and the drying line. He had taken the precaution, too, to bring a cozy blanket. Even summer nights are chilly for baby folk, and Bunty's baby was soon tucked into his comfy carriage, little dear. Then 1, 2, 3, and away they went, pulling and panting. That child was heavy, and were home in no time. It took 3 whole boo-boos to knock at the door. Oh, the gladness, the joy of everybody to have that baby safely back, and the fuss they made of the boos. It was great. Grandpa had to wipe his windows several times. Bless me, he said. They have saved the child. He went over to a very quiet corner to think how best to reward them. I have it, he cried excitedly. Let them all live in Bunty's dollhouse forever. So the next morning, you can imagine the bustle, the excitement. The doll's house must be spring cleaned. The boo-boos were very, very busy indeed. And when it was all done, to the last tin tack, Dick the gardener carried it out on his back to that dear part of the garden where the daisies are allowed to grow to their heart's content. And there lived the boo-boos, and are living there now, for all I know. And sometimes, when the nights are warm, and the moon sheds a gentle light, Bunty steals down to the garden and gazes across to the little white house with the gleaming lights. Good night, boo-boos, dear, she calls. Good night.